last year. Year to date, more than 1.1 million mobile tickets have been sold, and the app has been downloaded 150,000 times this year and has surpassed 256,000 total downloads since it was introduced about 2 years ago. Major events like the Super Bowl and State Fair helped drive mobile ticket sales this year, and mobile tickets will be also marketed to visitors attending next year's Final Four. We'll see a picture in a minute. We're trying something new on our light rail vehicles. We're going to try out some plastic seats. Cloth seats in the upper seating areas of several Bombardier trains are being replaced with plastic seats that could be easier to clean and maintain. We are testing the plastic seats on a few trains to get customer feedback and determine next steps. And then finally, our specially decorated holiday buses and trains are just one of the several ways we're celebrating the season. Earlier this month, several Metro Transit police officers joined with St. Paul Police to help more than 200 children select and wrap holiday gifts at the annual Shop with the Cop event. On Saturday, our North Star commuter train will be something like a Polar Express, making a special trip from Big Lake to St. Paul's Union Depot, where travelers can enjoy a winter market. The southbound train will depart Big Lake about 4:40 p.m., and the return trip will depart the Union Depot at 8 p.m. And then a reminder that on New Year's Eve, of course, we'll once again be partnering with Miller Lite to provide safe and free rides on all of our buses and trains between 6 p.m. and 3 a.m. And, of course, all of that lost revenue is subsidized by Miller Lite through that process, through that agreement. And sometime in the coming weeks, a recognizable special guest will surprise customers on some of our buses and trains. Cue the video. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from committee members? Thank you. Next up is our consent agenda with 3 items. Is there any discussion, or is there a motion to approve? There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Next up is non-consent, 2018-324. It's the same week item. It's the D-line design and construction contract. And Katie Roth is here. I'm sorry, and Rebecca.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Katie Roth, Manager of Arterial BRT. I am very excited to be here today taking an action before you for a major milestone on the D-line in which we're seeking to move the project into engineering by awarding an engineering and construction administration services contract. This is a big step to keep the project on track toward construction in 2020, and I am very happy to be presenting alongside Rebecca Fabamy, who will be presenting this item today. She is a principal engineer in engineering and facilities who has worked on the Orange Line in the past and will be leading the engineering on the D line going forward. So committee members will be seeing more of her as we take more actions. And with that, I'll hand it to Rebecca.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Again, my name is Rebecca Fabamy, and I'm the engineering lead for the D line. I'm here today to seek support and approval in presenting business item number 1018-324 SW at the December 12th Council. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute a professional services contract with HDR Engineering Incorporated in the amount of $9,493,918 for design, engineering, and construction administration for this project. A request for proposal was issued June 28th, 2018. 4 firms responded to this request. An evaluation panel representing council staff and project partners evaluated the proposals and ranked HDR the highest. A negotiations panel representing council staff then evaluated the highest ranked proposers, cost proposal, and recommends the contract being awarded to HDR Engineering Incorporated. Their proposal surpasses the office or our Office of Equal Opportunities contract assigned DBE goal of 20%. Contract 18P 182 will be structured and executed in 3 planned phases to advance the design using available funding. A Phase 1 limited notice to proceed for preliminary engineering not to exceed $2,425,856 will be authorized concurrent with contract administration. Funding for Phase 1 of this contract is available within the authorized D-Line project. Future following notice to proceeds for final design and construction will be issued when the additional funding becomes available. This project is well supported by communities it serves, project collaborators, and project partners. Thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Councilmember Latowski.
Great, no question, but I'm super excited that this is getting to this point, even short of full funding. It means that we are committed to the project and committed to the communities that is going to be served by this. So, very excited about this. Can I move it? Are we ready for that?
Go for it.
All right.
I'll
Move it,
support it.
Chair.
You moved it, didn't you? I second, Madam Chair.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you so much. Next up is 2018-326. It's also same week, and it's operator barriers. And Matt's here. I don't know if Joe is here. Oh, there he is.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Joe Reichs. I'm Assistant Director for Bus Maintenance, and this is Matt Day, Director for Bus Maintenance.
Good afternoon.
So we'd like to present business item 2018-326, authorization to purchase up to 450 operator barriers. The proposed action is the Metropolitan Council authorize a regional administrator to award a sole source procurement contract with Bentech Inc. in the amount not to exceed $1,125,000 to purchase up to 450 operator barriers. So in early 2018, we formed a joint committee made up primarily of bus operators, bus maintenance technicians, ATU executive board, management from both bus operations and bus maintenance, and the police department and the safety department. In that, we had a task to discuss which barrier would be best for the Metropolitan Council on our buses. We performed monthly meetings that were set up. We started in April. We were fortunate to have the operators and the technicians to provide input on our selection. So we evaluated 4 different style barriers. The first one was an AeroGuard barrier, and that one had a sliding window, fairly robust barrier. The next one was a vapor barrier, and that had a window that was a power window, go up and down, and it had some fans to it. Once again, a fairly robust barrier. And the third one was a TCB, and that was a split door design, kind of a Dutch door, and the top half could pin back. And the last one we tested was the one you'll see to the right, and that's called a Bentech barrier. That's primarily plexiglass with a metal extrusion, but the benefit to that one is it can pin back 180 degrees. So the operator can either use that barrier or not use it. And for the deployment, we rolled out to each garage for at least a week for display, and we also had it out there en route for the operators to test it. With that, I'll turn it over to Matt. Sure.
Thanks, Joe. Some of the deciding factors for the operators where they wanted a barrier where they didn't feel too confined, where it was closed, they don't want their elbows to hit it, and they still wanted to have a good customer interaction with the barrier closed or with the barrier opened, where they could still interact with their customers and have those relationships. The BENTIC allowed that. We had a unanimous selection. We took a vote on the barrier of all the members, which were maintenance mechanics, and the operators on the committee, and they unanimously voted for the BENTEC after trying it out at the different garages. That's the one everyone wanted, hands down. There was no real even debate on that. And our procurement strategy, our procurement plan is we're currently in process of purchasing 150 today to get ahead of some lead times with the holidays and other things that could possibly slow it down from getting here on property. And then we're seeking approval for the next up to 450 barriers that Joe had mentioned in the beginning, not to exceed the $1,125,000. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Other questions from committee members? Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So how are they going to prioritize according to routes or requests by the driver? How exactly is that going to go?
Madam Chair, committee member, we are purchasing, this would give our fleet about 600 barriers. Our fleet's about 900, a little over 900, so it'll cover 2/3 of the fleet. We're primarily going to focus on 40-foot buses for now, with a mix of some Arctics in there. As far as route scheduling, I think we'll be able to encompass most of the routes with 600 buses equipped, but it is a challenge to select, just for certain routes too. So I think we can accomplish it with the majority of the buses, though.
And remind me again, if I may, Madam Chair, how long is this process going to take to get, say, what are the target dates to get them all done? Half of them done, a quarter of them done? What does the timeline look like?
Madam Chair, committee member, our timeline would primarily be, we'd focus on trying to do 8 a week. We would be looking at probably a year and a half before we got 600 implemented. So we are keeping the installs in-house for our technicians to do the installs.
Is there any way to target or to prioritize accordingly as to routes that there's been a higher percentage or situations that have occurred?
Madam Chair, committee member, there is that possibility, and I think we're going to try to attempt to do that and focus on that. I don't think we have a definitive plan at this point, but we'll definitely focus on that. Looking forward.
Other further questions? Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, I see Ryan Timlin in the audience. I want to thank ATU for raising the concerns about driver safety, and I appreciate your partnership in figuring out a way that we can make things safer.
Are there further questions or comments?
I move approval.
A second.
Moved and seconded. Yes, I know that when you were first exploring these, there was a lot of different opinions about which ones would work. So it's good that management and the union were able to work in concert to find something that pleases everyone. So we have a first and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is 2018-335. It's also same week. Bus go-to car leader procurement. And Nick Yule is here. Hey, Nick.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Nick Yule, and I'm the Senior Manager of Revenue Operations at Metro Transit. And I'm here today with business item 2018-335. The proposed action for this business item is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a sole source contract with Cubic Transportation Systems for the purchase of additional go-to card readers and associated parts in an amount not to exceed $700,000. And a little background on this procurement. Metro Transit, we replaced all of our original go-to card readers, better known as footballs, to those folks that have been around for a while, in 2016, and those devices were no longer supported after about 13 years. And so the new device, called the Bus Mobile Validator, looks more like a tablet if you haven't seen them before. And we have about 2,000 of those devices in our system, including both Metro Transit and the dial-a-ride fleet, Metro Mobility. And Metro Mobility was actually first. They installed their devices in 2014, and then we came afterwards in 2016. And so earlier this year, MTS installed about 100 of these units on Metro Mobility vehicles that previously were not collecting fares. And those 100 units came from the MTS spare allocation. In addition, while the new devices are about 3 times as reliable as the old devices, when they fail because of the way they're manufactured, there's a higher probability that they would be non-repairable. Just because of current manufacturing prices, there's a lot of single-board technology here. It's not as modular as some of the old ones, so we just can't take one part out that's bad and put a new part in. A lot of times when they go bad, the whole unit is just unrepairable. And we're seeing about a 3% of our total units fail per year that fall into that category. And so because of this, staff are requesting to purchase up to 213 additional units from Cubic at a cost of about $3,000 each. Now, this cost is comparable to what we paid for these units 3 years ago when we first installed them. 113 of these units would be purchased for MTS to support their fleet, and the remaining 100 would be for Metro Transit. And just so you're aware, about 60% of all of our fare payments are made using the GO-TO card, so these are still a very important part of our fare payment process. The funds for this purchase are included in both Metro Transit and MTS's 2018 budget. And so with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Councilmember Atkins.
Last week I met with a small group of Metro Mobility customers, and some of them have been experimenting with different ways of getting around, including Uber and Lyft, and one of them asked me a question which left me scratching my head, which is, for Metro Mobility, why don't we do the fares the way Uber and Lyft do it?
Madam Chair.
Director Thompson.
And can you be more specific in
You
how they're
book the
asking?
ride in advance, it's booked, and you never have to whip out a card or anything. You just, when you're done, you're done.
Madam Chair, committee member, we actually are exploring different ways that we could do that because we do know the rides are pre-booked, and that could reduce some of our infrastructure cost. So we've started to explore how we could do that and still meet all the needs of the system, but it's definitely something that's been raised before.
Are there other questions? Is there a motion?
Move the approval.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Nick, next up is our information agenda, and the first item is the regional solicitation scores, and Liz and Steve Peterson is here to present.
Madam Chair, if I may, would it be,
Councilmember Reynoso.
would you consider moving, I know we should have addressed this at the beginning, but instead of making these people wait till the very end, possibly moving number 4 up to number 1?
It's number, I think they're here to speak to number 3.
Oh, number 3, I'm sorry.
But sure, that's fine. Is the committee okay with that? That's fine. Can Greg, if not, we can just keep going.
I think he can.
Okay.
He can.
The regional solicitation is fascinating. And the Orange Line update.
Yeah.
It's going to be a celebration, so.
Such a robust.
All right, Madam Chair, council members, my name is Brian Funk. I'm the Deputy Chief Operating Officer for Bus here at Metro Transit, joined today by Matt Dake,
Sorry.
Director of Bus Maintenance. And we're going to go ahead and give you an update on where we see our bus fleet progressing the next several years, and ultimately what some goals are that we're setting and announcing today. What we see on the screen right now is a picture of our very first electric bus. This bus is being manufactured by New Flyer Industries in St. Cloud. It's the first electric bus manufactured at the St. Cloud facility, and it's the first electric 60-foot bus manufactured by New Flyer. And so we have a number of firsts, including the first 3-door articulated bus that we'll be putting into service with C-Line later in the spring. Talking a little bit here about why we're here today and what our objectives are. So as we say on the screen here, our goal is to have a near-term strategic framework for future bus procurements. with an ultimate goal of moving towards full electrification. Now, this is an aspirational goal, and there are some key measures that we need to hit before we get that far, but we think that this plan sets us up to be successful to fully evaluate and try to make that a reality. Should these pilot programs that we're going to be discussing in more detail show that the buses are able to meet our service needs to provide reliable transportation, we'll be moving towards a higher and higher percentage of electric bus purchases over the next several years. This plan also addresses both replacing our existing fleet. We're currently on a 14-year replacement plan for our buses. By the end, they're ready to be replaced. It also addresses our need for some expansion vehicles, including the bus rapid transit projects that we're all well aware of. And finally, what we believe this plan does is it introduces a sufficient number of buses, both 40-foot and 60-foot buses, to test these and prove them in our service environment. We know that technology around electric buses is rapidly evolving and developing, and we at Metro Transit need to experience it in our environment. We certainly have concerns, but what we need to test is primarily around the operating range. So how long can the bus be on the street to meet our service needs? What are the steps we need to do to ensure that happens? How are we going to heat the bus in the winter? These are all things we've planned for with the pilot buses, but until we have them in service and start putting them through the paces, so to speak, it's a bit of an unknown. And then there's also the additional capital expenses that we know that we can sustain in the short term, but how does that play out long term, and what does the funding picture look like? And finally, the overall reliability. When it comes down to it, we're trying to provide the most reliable service for our customers, and we want to make sure that these buses are up to the task. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to first start by walking us through our status on our C-Line pilot program.
Thank you, Brian. So we wanted to go over some of the C-Line characteristics. So as most everyone knows, operates 7 days a week in a very highly traveled transit corridor. It's a 17-mile round trip. There's going to be 8 electric buses and 6 diesel buses providing that service on the C-Line. It's going to be 3-door boarding, which kind of goes back to what Brian said about the heating and cooling. When you open 3 doors, it lets a lot more of the outside environment into the bus, which puts a bigger load on the HVAC system. So we're going to learn from that. We'll have 8 garage chargers for the buses at Haywood Garage. So it's 1 charger per bus at the garage. And then 2 en route chargers, which are both at BCTC, which will charge the buses throughout the day as a range extender, if you will. This here, just last week, Brian, myself, and a couple others were in New York Transit, and we looked at their electric bus. They have 5 40-foot New Flyer buses, and they have 5 40-foot electric Proterra buses. So I'm going to play a video there that's on the left hand of the screen. And this, it's pulling up to charge en route.
Charge starts. So he's securing the bus, stays in run, he puts on the puts in neutral, puts on the parking brake, and then he puts the bus in charge mode, which is the same switch you operate the depot charge. Now the pantograph is flowing. Now it's doing a couple checks, and it should, yeah, now it's charging.
Pretty straightforward.
So it's hard to see in the video, but there is on the charger itself, where it comes down at about operator level, there's an LED band, and it's blue when it's not charging, and then when it's charging, it's like a purplish color. So it indicates to the operator that it is charging. Also, to initiate the charging, the operator needs to initiate the charge. There's a switch above the traditional start button on the bus, where they arm the switch, and now the bus communicates with the charger. And that provides all the interlocks so the bus can't be driven away once it's in the charge mode. The next picture is just an example of the dash on the bus, which will be similar to our C-Line bus, where the green arrow is pointing down. That's a LCD screen that can be configured to the customer's wants. It's very difficult to see, but there is one bar, which is the highest bar of the 3, which is the state of charge of the propulsion batteries of the bus. At that point, I think it was 78%, if I remember correctly at that time. And when it charged, it went up to 91%. Next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about what does the en-route charging mean and what is it for. So when you charge the bus, our particular C-Line bus, at the garage overnight, To put it in miles terms, it starts off with a 112-mile range on a 466 kilowatt hour battery. So when we drive to the route, we're now down, you'll see that number of 101. We've used 11 miles. We have 101 miles of range left in that bus. We drive the 17 miles, and you'll see the 84 there, which is basically the 17 miles from the 101. We have 84 miles of range left in the battery. We charge for 12 minutes. Just pick 12 minutes as a number. We're not sure if that's the number we're going to be using as we set up the work runs. But you put the 12 minutes of charge back into it, you get approximately 12 miles of range, which takes us back up to the 96 and a half. So throughout the day, that's how it works. It slowly, the charge goes down because you're losing 4.5 miles of range per loop or per round trip. So that's what it looks like, and that's how the on-route charger helps keep us out there a longer period throughout the day.
And I think one of the things that we're going to need to learn and want to gain from this, as Matt said, is the 12 minutes is a time that, based on these estimates, looks like about the right time for us to be able to keep the bus out there for a sufficient number of hours to complete the work assignments. However, that's 12 minutes that the bus isn't operating. And so we're trying to find what's that balancing point of not being idle too much of the time, making use of that investment, keeping the bus operating and picking up customers, while ensuring that it can stay out there for the duration of the service day.
And one other piece I'd like to add is the buses don't operate from 100% charge to zero, right? You zero, you're out of power, you're dead in water, right? So the batteries like to operate optimally for the performance of the battery between a 95 and 25% range. That's the ideal band of using a battery is throughout that range. So you never start at 100 and never go down to zero. Even though you can calculate that out to that will give you so much range, it's not how it really works. So right now we're in a unique position of not having an immediate need for 40-foot buses. And what that's allowing us to do is better position us to get a better understanding of electrifying the bus fleet. So we'd like to procure and test 19 electric 40-foot buses and take a measured approach and test those vehicles in our local route service environment. That'll help us gain a better understanding, as I said, of not only the operating behavior, but there's infrastructure requirements that go along with that. There's garage chargers. There's possibly en route chargers as well to support that. And additionally, there's training needs. Not only is there training for the operator and how they best operate that vehicle and get the best range of the vehicle with brake regeneration and such, but there's also the technician training that goes along with it that will all be new to us. Now, speaking to the BRT routes, our plan is to do 50% of the buses with BRT routes with electric propulsion and the other 50% with diesel propulsion. So our plan is to, in addition to the 8 buses in the C lines, procure and test 30 electric 60-foot BRT buses, learn the operational characteristics, particularly with the on-route charging, as I described in that New York slide, and the impact of 3-door boarding, and the weather conditions when it's extremely cold and it's extremely warm. How does that impact the range? Because you have propulsion load and you call what's called a hotel load, which is everything that's used other than propelling the bus forward, which is your environment, your lights and things of that nature. So we need to learn what is the right size battery. Do we need to keep just getting a bigger and bigger battery as technology goes, or is there a right size battery? Because there's a cost that comes with the battery. The larger the battery, the more it costs. So what is that right size? And that's part of what we learn, how that fits into our environment. How many garage chargers do we need? Is it a 1-for-1 as we're doing today with the C line, or will that be able to be a 3-for-1, 3 chargers for 1 bus? Don't know. We're going to find that out. And additionally, as I mentioned, the on-route charging. How many buses from different work runs can one en route charger support? And that's also what we'll learn from this. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the procurements in 2019 to 2022. I'm going to walk through it. So this is 2019, and we have an order that's going to be delivered next year, which we got approval for earlier this year, which is 20 40-foot buses, 3 of which are going the A line, and the remaining 17 are just standard diesel replacement buses. We have the 8 electric buses for the C line, which is there in green, and we have the 6 diesel buses for the C line, which is in blue. This is for 2020. We have the 19 40-foot electric buses I mentioned on the previous slide that we'll start our testing on with the 40-foot local type route service. We have 13 D-line buses as electric. We have 13 D-line diesels. That's our BRT 50-50 split. We have 14 orange line, which is 100% diesel for the orange line due to what's already been planned and some range issues, I believe, Brian.
Yeah, so based on where we're at with the funding for Orange Line, they were submitted with diesel in that mix. The good news is that that becomes part of our BRT fleet, and it doesn't preclude us from being able to use the electric buses as part of that larger fleet down the road.
And then the next at the top of that bar is 15 standard 60-foot diesel bus that's used more for like the commuting type service. For the next 2021, we are now, and you'll see we've received the buses at the top there. We have started our testing phase. So with the C line, we have our buses start operating in the middle of 2019. We get the 19 40-foot electrics and then the 13 D-line electrics in 2020, and we're starting our testing and evaluation stage. And in 2021, we have 10 B-line buses, which are electric, 10 B-line buses, which are diesel, and then the 10 60-foot diesels, which are their standard diesel bus replacements. Now we get to the decide stage for 2022, and our goal for 2022, if, one, we have the funding to do this, if the testing works out in these years, these aforementioned years of where it can provide the service that we hope it can provide, our procurement for 2022 will be 100% electric. That'll be 46 40-foot electric buses, 14 E-line buses, which is 100% of the E-line instead of doing the 50-50 split, and then that 15, which were previously our standard diesel replacements, would be electric as well. So that's the goal, pending funding and operationally it fitting our service needs.
Can you pause there just a little bit and just give some ballpark figures about how much more it is for electric buses? And I know that the technology is changing and there's a lot of learning yet to do with that, but just to give an idea for folks.
Yeah, so there's two components. There's the additional capital cost for the vehicle itself. In the example of the 60-foot buses that we're acquiring from New Flyer, in round numbers, they're about $1.2 million per bus, as compared to a 60-foot bus of similar look, similar feel, being between $700,000 and $800,000. And so that electric propulsion with the battery technology is that upcharge, the delta there. In addition to that, you have the infrastructure expenses. So you have in-garage charging, which we need for primarily overnight charging, but anything you're doing back here at the garage. Those, again, in round numbers, are approximately $100,000 a piece. And at this point, we know that in order to do successful testing and ensure that we're able to charge these buses reliably day after day after day, we need to have a one-for-one match. The goal is that we don't have 100 electric buses with 100 depot chargers, but until we start to gain some experience and understand how that works, that's the initial model that we're walking into. And then finally, the en-route charger. So what we hope, and we really need to be the case, is that the en-route charger is sort of a bridge to get us to being able to operate all day long with the battery power that each bus is carrying around. The en-route chargers at Brooklyn Center Transit Center are about $750,000 each, including construction and installation, commissioning, whatnot. You're approaching $1 million for each one of those units. And so it's an investment, certainly, that we're going to make use of. We've chosen these C-line buses so that they're able to both carry a lot of battery power on board, but they also have the technology, the battery chemistry to be able to accept the fast charge. And so we thought that was the right mix to get us started, knowing that there is a significant price to be paid going in on the front end. And as I believe I mentioned earlier, we'll continue to evaluate what's the life cycle cost. We know that there are a couple of maintenance activities that you don't need to do with an electric motor as opposed to a diesel engine. And so that's something we'll be tracking closely. It's a little bit early to project what we think those numbers are. However, we're tuned in to make sure that we're keeping a close eye on those things.
Thank you. Councilmember Latowski.
Great, thanks. Another aspect is obviously the operations cost, right? The cost between paying the diesel gas cost and the electricity. Do we know anything about that, or is that going to be part of the study period?
Sure, that would be part of the study, and we know some things about that, right? We know what diesel cost is. That's very easy to come up with. We've been doing it for many, many years, and it's fixed. You know, if I pump diesel in the morning, it costs the same as I pump it in the afternoon. With electricity, there's demand charges. So there's peak demand charges where you have everything is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's a peak demand charge, and then when you get outside these hours, it's a lower cost. So we'll have to learn of when is the best time to charge, not only from a cost perspective, but there's an operational considerations. Just because it's the least expensive time to do it doesn't mean it's operationally the best time to do it, because we still have to provide service. When it comes to the en-route charger, it's very hard to avoid peak service because that's when you're operating is during those peak electrical demands and the cost is a little higher. So the en route charges typically be done at the higher cost of electricity within those hours.
Councilmember Hawkins.
Has New Flyer given us any warranties about the battery performance at this point?
Sure. The base warranty for the battery, and I believe is 7 years. But what's interesting about the warranty is when does it become warrantable? And when it becomes warrantable is when the stated charge is 70% or less. So you've lost, a percentage of your capacity, you're down to 70%. So that's when it's exercisable. That doesn't necessarily mean operationally we could wait till it's 70%.
Comment, the best time to charge it, the charging strategy, especially in the winter, is you want the battery to finish charging just before you drive it out the door.
Right.
Experience in that, huh?
The next slide is about our procurement strategy. One's the issue of 40-foot electric RFP for the 19 electric buses that we would be testing, with the option for 46, which is in that last year of 2022. And then issue a 60-foot electric and diesel RFP for 30 electric 60-foot buses with an option for 22, which that would make the whole 100% in 2022. That 30 is not counting the 8 for the C line. And then the other option is 62 diesel 60-foot buses with options for 22. If for some reason we weren't able to get the full electrification in that year of 2022, we still have the option to fill it with diesel so we don't have a lapse in service and or fleet starts becoming unreliable. We can still exercise the diesel option. Now, in our outlying years of 2023 and 2024, we have some pretty big fleet requirements, and I talked about that a couple slides ago, where we're in the position now where we have some time to make some good strategic decisions and do some good testing to figure how well this electrification fits into our fleet. So in 2023, we have a requirement of 11 60-foot buses and 58 40-foot buses. And then in 2024, we have 40 60-foot buses and 61 40-foot buses. So we don't have a propulsion type on there. That's a lot to determine what happens in the next 2 years. And, well, all these buses fit into the envelope of electric fleet. Some of the buses may not fit into the electric vehicle profile, the range. They may still need to continue to be diesels. Technology may improve as we go. I'm sure it will, and maybe they all will. But I guess the point of the slide is this is our need, and at the moment today, we don't know exactly what the makeup's going to be of these buses.
And I think that leaving this and sort of summarizing, where we believe that it's the best place for us to spend our time and energy and where we should focus. We're continuing to stay very engaged with other properties, with the vehicle manufacturers. In addition to Matt, myself, and a couple others visiting New York last week as part of another visit, we're also going to be going up to Duluth on Friday to talk to the team in Duluth who has some Proterra buses that they put into service just last month to learn about what some of their early experiences are. We're also drawing on, of course, our industry contacts and going to be working this problem until we really get the results and the answers that we're seeking.
And now we're happy, that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
Are there further questions from committee members? Thank you for your Councilmember Vanessa.
This is exciting. I think this is really cool. As far as the difference between the diesel buses that we'll be utilizing, I mean, how far have we come on the emissions? And I mean, compare a diesel engine now versus even 5 years ago. How much more? How much less combustion and exhaust is there?
Right.
That comes out.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Councilmember Reynoso, I can take the first sort of non-super technical stab at it. I'll turn over to Matt for some more of the details.
They're
but
much cleaner than they used to be.
They are, and so when we came to committee and council for the procurement of the 20 diesel buses earlier this year, that was one of the things that we looked at. And in as far as like NOx emissions that you hear about with the VW settlement, as well as particulate, you're right. Emission controls have gotten a lot tighter, and so we know that as compared to the buses we're replacing, the 2004, 2005 vintage buses, 9 buses today are producing the same emissions as just one bus from that model year. And so to your point, you're exactly right that we have come a long way. With that has come additional maintenance, certainly some additional steps that we've had to take, through the particulate trap cleaning and all those sorts of things. And we're learning as we go too, as those engines age, how reliable are they going to be, and what sort of steps do we need to take in the interim to ensure that they make it the entire life of the bus.
I think you answered it fine. As far as the ratio goes, is what it is, as Brian described. They're many times cleaner than they were before.
And just a comment, I mean, this is great. New Flyers, American-made, Minnesota-made, and Union-made.
Mm-hmm.
So, those are 3 great criteria. So.
Are there other questions or comments? Councilmember Munn.
Madam Chair, I really appreciate how responsive staff have been. There's been a real sense of urgency around this table to move towards electrifying our fleet. And I think it's a statement about our commitment to the health of our riders, our drivers, and the communities that we serve. And, in my district, I'm hearing a demand for this from high school students who are making decisions about where am I going to live? Should I buy a car? What can I do to shrink the carbon footprint? And I think that's really important. I think it's an important statement to our customers from Metro Transit, and I think it's a legacy issue for the people around this table.
Thank you. I also want to commend staff. I think, you've tried to find the balance between being on the leading edge of this and not being on the bleeding edge of it. We've had a lot of headlines recently about climate change, and it's alarming. The best scientists in the world are saying we've got 12 years to readjust. And so I'm really excited that we're being proactive in getting those 19 buses in, and also adding electric buses to the C line so we can start learning how they can fit into our service. I'm really hopeful that the technology continues to improve and that we can continue with an aggressive adjustment. And I think I appreciate what Councilmember Reynoso said about our diesel really are much more cleaner burning than the old buses, but at the same time, what dovetails nicely with where Excel is going with renewable energy and totally clean energy is electric. Thank you for your hard work on all of this. And now we can hear from the folks that are here. And if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, and I'll call your name, but I will try and get it right. But if you want to state your name, and then if you're representing an organization or part of an organization, you can share that with us as well. And the first person that signed up was Renee Brand. Is she here?
My name is Matt Lalou. I think I'm second on the list.
Okay. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. We are from CWA, Communication Workers of America, Local 7304. We represent about 850 union members at New Flyer, St. Cloud, and Crookston plants. There also is about 200 management people. So we are 100% behind the electric buses for environmental reasons, and also they would bring good manufacturing jobs to Minnesota and sustain our communities.
Yep. Our coworkers built the new Flyer bus that was talked about earlier, so that's something that we're proud about, and we appreciate you doing business locally and keeping it in the state and keeping us busy at our jobs. So on behalf of our 850 employees, we wanted to say thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Next is, I think it's Maggie. Maggie, I don't know the last name. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm guilty of poor writing.
I am as well.
My name is Maggie O'Connor, and I work with, I am part of Min 350's efforts of organizing. I'm a retired palliative care physician and an avid transit rider, and really like hearing what I've heard today. I wanted to just briefly talk a little bit about the health issues of diesel emissions. The first issue is we need to be cognizant that there's a social justice issue. The communities of color and low-income communities that are on major transit ways bear the brunt of this, despite the fact that more often they are using transit, don't own cars, or not driving cars, which is, of course, what we should all be doing. The second issue is the actual impact. I'm sure you've heard that elderly, young people, those with illnesses, chronic illnesses, heart and lungs are most at risk. I want to just share with you a sense of why that is. Our lungs are lined with these incredible tiny hairs called cilia. Imagine velvet in your lungs. That particulate matter, amongst other things, destroys those cells, and you move from velvet to untanned leather. The secretions can't be cleared, more particles, bacteria, so on, stick, and there's a very, very bad cycle with that. So I hope that we can move towards 100% electric with everything willing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Noah Shevet Lowenstein.
Hi.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. My name is Noah Shavit-Wonstein. I am an organizer with Minnesota 350, and I've been part of our clean transportation efforts. And I just want to, first of all, take a minute to thank everyone here today. I want to thank the members of the committee who have been supportive of this plan, the people at Metro Transit who are doubling down and taking this issue seriously, and all the members of the community who came out in support today. We've heard a lot of good things about this plan. We've been talking to bus riders and community members about the importance of clean transportation, and people are very aware that we do not have time to wait. People who are sick, like you've said, our climate does not have time to wait, and that's why it's so important that we're being really proactive about this. And we have also a stack of 1,200 petitions showing just how much public support there is for this. I don't know where to put them, but we can get those to you. And again, we hope you continue to support this plan and that your successors on the council continue to support it when it comes down to the wire. And if just for a visual of how much 1,200 is, we have 1,200 M&Ms here in jars. I want to get a picture of all of that.
I want the big one.
We'll get that all to you.
And if you share these with mechanics or drivers, we love it.
Thank you.
We thank you for the direction you've taken.
Next is Danielle I'm sorry, I'm butchering that. Welcome to the committee.
Hi, thank you. I'm Danielle Trujano, and I'm also with MN350. I've been doing a lot of canvassing on buses and trains and talking to folks about what's at stake for them with clean transportation and why they care about clean transportation. And I've gotten a lot of really impactful feedback about how people with asthma and COPD and are really affected by emissions from traffic, including buses, and how they're really invested in moving towards clean transportation. Yeah, and then also people are concerned about climate change, and just wanting to reiterate the fact that our community is really on board with electrifying, and so thank you so much for this awesome step. I'm really excited about it. And another thing to keep in mind too, in terms of implementing this electrification, is there are communities who are more impacted by pollution and have higher asthma rates, and we want to make sure that those buses are going there first, because that will be like the most impactful. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your advocacy and work. Next is Lori Bruno. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I? Oh, you signed that way. I'm sorry. Chris Wells.
Thanks for the chance to talk to you. I'm talking as a citizen and a grandfather, a bus rider. I live 3929 Elliott Ave. I ride the 5 and the 23 all the time, so I appreciate what's been said about the air. But my main concern is climate change. I feel like we have a moral obligation to do something about climate change, and it's not being done on the federal level. And it's huge for you to take a step like this. It provides an example to other cities, provides an example to private citizens, and the electric vehicles have been held back for so long for no reason other than money. And I'm just so happy to see this happening, and thank you.
Thank you. Josh Hodak is next.
Madam Chair Rodriguez and Metropolitan Council members, my name is Joshua Hodak. I'm the Land Use and Transportation Program Manager at the Sierra Club Minnesota North Star chapter. We've been working in concert with our allies at MN350 and the Transit Riders Union and Isaiah and Fresh Energy and Take Action Minnesota on this campaign for over a year. We want to thank you for your leadership. I was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago with Sierra Club leaders from all over the nation, and we're talking about transportation because as we're winning on coal plants and shutting down dirty energy, the transportation is now the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions not only in Minnesota, but across the country. So this is, so Minnesota right now is I can tell you from talking to my colleagues across the nation, in a spotlight. And we've been on the edge of our seats, seeing what leadership Minnesota and Metro Transit and Metropolitan Council will take on transitioning their buses to full zero emission electric vehicles. So just want to thank you so much for your leadership. We're anxious to see this as a first step. We recognize and honor the fact that we need to learn as we bring this technology on board, and we'll be tracking it closely. So thank you again.
Thank you. I don't think it's Jamie. Jamie Watts? It's Fresh Energy. Jamie McCall? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Scribbled it down there. Hi, it's Janice Watts. And
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No worries. I'm Policy Associate at Fresh Energy, and Fresh Energy is a member of the Coalition for Clean Transportation. And we want to send a statement of support for this plan. It's very exciting to see you all moving forward with this plan to electrify our bus fleets. And as certainly there's many reasons why for that, and we support all of them. Renewable energy and transit are critical pieces to transitioning Minnesota to a livable environment free of fossil fuel emissions, where everyone can travel safely without the burden of pollution. And policies like this make this transition possible, but only with the vision and leadership and inclusion of all impacted communities and those who will be impacted by these policies and the plans to follow. So just really wanted to reiterate that so many communities will be impacted by this policy and this plan, and that having space for all to participate and feel included is really, really important. So thank you for this work, and look forward to seeing Minnesota continue to be a leader in safe, accessible, and clean transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have on the list. Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
I signed up late.
Oh, sure, come on forward.
My name is Chuck Steffel. I was a little late on the green line. I am a retired engineer and attorney, and I frequent the bus on 70, 74, 63, and the Green Line from St. Paul. What I'm appreciative of this is that you've got a plan that will bring more green energy into play. I just had one question about the availability of 100% green energy from Xcel, because I go wind. I haven't gone solar. Solar wouldn't work for charging buses. I'm aware of that. But have you made a package deal with Xcel to get good rates for you buy electricity for all over the place? That's my only question. I thank you very much. I'm also a member of MN 350, Our Streets Minneapolis, and Sierra Club, and I'm happy to canvass and do surveys, even the walking, bicycling, transit surveys, because we need to know how people are getting around. I think you do appreciate that very much. I thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, council members, as far as the question goes, moving forward, we are going to continue to, now I'm blanking on the core question, if you bear with me.
The partnership with Xcel. I know that we've been working with them.
The evolving partnership with Xcel. And as you know, that earlier this year, the council entered into an agreement with Xcel that not only gave some clear near-term deliverables, which includes the infrastructure costs and implementation costs for the charging equipment that Mr. Funk laid out, but also goes towards the idea of zero emissions, both on the front end and back end. So what's that look like? And the idea of wind energy as well as solar energy, and what that plays and how we can provide that transportation system that not only has that back end emissions free, but really focuses in on the production of that energy from front end emissions free.
Yes. And I saw you back there as well.
Yes, Madam Chair and council members, my name is Stan Sattinger. I came late. Signed to speak, but I guess that piece of paper didn't get to you. I am co-leader of a newly formed wing of Min 350, which we call Climate Solutions Team. And I will just briefly say that we have 4 different areas of focus that we're looking to as means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's our number one mission, is to find ways that we can be involved in getting greenhouse gases reduced. And I will say that one of those 4 focus areas is electric vehicles. And we place a lot of faith and emphasis and optimism in that solution approach being a good one. And I just want to thank you all for your wisdom and your optimism in taking on this this new bold step. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And there's a gentleman in the far back.
I signed in on the same sheet as these guys,
Yeah,
I guess.
sorry.
That's okay. I'm Evan Mulholland, and I'm a new resident. I just moved here about a month ago from New Hampshire. And I think what you guys have done here is terrific. I hope it's a first step and not a last step. Climate change is the biggest issue for me, and that's why I'm here. I just also joined the Minnesota 350. So I just wanted to come up here personally and thank you and to encourage you to keep going as fast as you can. And I ride the bus and the train too, so thanks.
We're grateful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lalita Sirapaneni. I'm a practicing internal medicine physician at the university. I really am 100% supportive of this initiative and wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I did want to mention that with the diesel buses, we have 2 types of particles that are emitted. The diesel exhaust particles, which are known carcinogens, can cause lung cancer and have also been associated with urinary bladder cancer. And the particulate matter, which is released during acceleration and even when the buses brake. And so newer research is showing that even with the current air quality standards, even levels below that, we're seeing effects, including exposure to particulate matter for several hours can cause high blood pressure. And in addition to that, electrifying our fleet will really reduce air pollution. And as everyone here has mentioned, there's a huge environmental justice issue. People who are children or differently abled people who take public transportation most will be impacted by this. And so electrifying the fleet will really provide a lot of health benefits. And finally, the issue of climate change has been brought up multiple times, and with the most recent Lancet Countdown report and the National Climate Assessment, we see that we're already being impacted by climate change, and as healthcare professionals, we're seeing those impacts. In Minnesota, we see an increase in heat strokes and increased cases of Lyme disease, and so this would be a step in the right direction, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would wish to speak? Yes, sir, come on.
Hi, my name is Dan Raskin. I work as a research technician in an agricultural research lab at the University of Minnesota. So I do research helping farmers adapt to the changing climate. I live in Minneapolis. I take the bus, I ride my bike, and I wanted to do something in my community. So I went out with Min 350 to canvass on the buses and collecting some of those petitions that Noah presented. And I just wanted to share a little bit of my experience canvassing on public transportation. Not the most intuitively comfortable environment, going up to people saying, hi, can I talk to you on your commute? So overcoming some nerves was part of my experience, but I talked to nobody who dismissed the idea of electric buses. 60 or 70% estimate, the people that I spoke to were really enthusiastic about electrification of the fleet. Other issues that came up were equity throughout the transit system, affordability, reliability of the buses, but people were genuinely excited to see that this would be going forward and that they had a voice. So thank you.
Thank you. I think there was one more speaker. Yes.
Hi, my name is Simon Townsend. Thank you all for your work on this. I live in Roseville, closer to the 87, but I take the A line more often because it runs more frequently. I'm car-free because of climate change, but when I volunteer with 350, and when I first heard of the electrification program, I wasn't as excited as you might think, because sometimes I ride the bus in the evenings, and I have to connect, and so I care about good service and also affordability. But when they were telling me about the asthma and the other issues, I got more excited about it. I studied economics, and I tell people my favorite econ paper is one that looks at the reduction of crime in the 90s in the United States. And when I was in high school, they thought it might, one factor would be Roe versus Wade. But actually, academics have done the research, and they now think the biggest factor explaining the reduction of crime in the 90s is removing lead from gasoline in the 70s. Which just, whenever I think about it, blows my mind in terms of, the effects that, cleaner air might be having in the future. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Yes.
So,
Councilmember
Chair,
Dorfman.
thank you. Question maybe for Matt or Brian. So as we're doing the testing phases, how are we going to communicate findings to the public and, sort of what we're seeing and how we're responding and whether we're on track for this phased rollout?
Well, Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, maybe I can answer that question. First of all, we do intend to continue to give regular updates to the Council Transportation Committee. But also, because we know that there is such public interest in this, we intend to keep our key metrics on the webpage so people will be able to kind of follow along with our findings.
Councilmember Lotowski.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight and for speaking in support of this. What I was wondering is has this been presented to the Equity Advisory Committee? I guess it's a question for Matt and Brian, and that might be an interesting place to bring it and see what they say about it.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Lotowski, the answer is no, it hasn't. But I do think when you look at our deployment strategy, I think, as many of the members said, it's a matter of equity. One of the things that first of all, our bus rapid transit, as you know, our plan is that most areas of concentrated poverty are impacted by the planned rollout over the course of the next several years, as well as that 40-foot test that we're talking about. One of the areas that we're talking about is trying to concentrate that along a specific one or two corridors. At the very same time, those hybrid buses that were in that 2007 vintage are coming to retirement. And so we were thinking that perhaps along the South Minneapolis corridor and maybe an East Metro corridor along Nicollet Avenue might be one of those examples of areas that we would focus the tests along.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councilmember Mont.
Madam Chair, our goal is 100% electric bus delivery in 2023. That's 75 buses. But there's an if there. It's if we have the funding to do so. So I too want to thank the advocates for being here, but I want to tell you that your advocacy isn't over yet. We are going to need the funding from the legislature in order to make these wise investments in clean energy and if you can make the same case that you've made to us today to the legislature next session, I think we can get there.
Are there any other questions or comments? Councilmember Elkins.
Our first Sea Line bus is going to be out this winter, so we can start collecting data on the winter battery performance.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Elkins, we, the first of the Model C line electric buses are planned to come off the line and be delivered in January. We have a kind of a timing issue of both getting the charging equipment, which isn't off the shelf either, but also so that can arrive, and then some training that we'll conduct. So we're going to largely miss really getting some good hard data in the winter. By the time we get enough of the critical mass that's staff trained and that kind of thing, we expect that to happen more in the kind of the March, the April timeframe as we prepare for the June implementation of the Sea Line. But we do anticipate that we will have two winters to assess the 60-foot performance before the next critical decision point by the council.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. It's a rarity, I think, in public life to have a room full of folks that are applauding your work as opposed to. Thank you. Letting you know where you fail. So thank you. I do appreciate your advocacy. And I'm lost on the agenda, but I think we are.
I move approval.
It's information. But I second
I
it.
second it.
Next up is the regional solicitation scores and ranked list, and Steve is here to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clearing the room here for this item, but we wanted to give you a brief update of where we're at with the regional solicitation for transportation projects. And here's the elaborate application process and number of applications, 10 applications that Councilmember Elkins and Madam Chair, you've taken a deep dive on over the last several years. So we appreciate all the questions and work you've done on this to really better understand it and explain it to folks. But we're looking at distributing money. The tab is in 2022 and 2023. We have roughly $175 million, and we always do some bit of over-programming or additional money as projects fall out. So we might be upwards of close to $195 to $200 million of available funds. And you can see the amount of applications and the number of applications that have been submitted far outpace the $195 million or so that we have. So we received about $419 million of applications came in the door. So we're going to be 40% or less of awarding. So great demand out there for both roadway projects, transit, and bike ped across our communities that we have to be cognizant of, that we're only funding a small portion of those requests. So we did map where those projects are located throughout the region. These are the applications that did come in the door, 137 projects for the $419 million. And we did quite a bit of outreach this year, but as you look at the map, there are certain places across the region where we didn't receive a lot of applications. And so we're going to kind of keep on some of those areas and make sure we are getting applications are spread across the region, because geographic balance and distribution of those funds has been an important conversation piece that we've had at all levels, at the technical and elected officials at the tab level the last several months here. And so at this point, we have 4 funding scenarios that tab has directed council staff to put together, and I don't have to go through these in great detail, but the first 3 are all based on a base scenario where we distribute the money based on the historical averages and the historical distributions. So in the past, going back to 2003, we've distributed about 58% of the money to the roadway projects, 27% to transit and travel demand management, TDM, and then 15% to bicycle and pedestrian type projects. And so the first 3 scenarios we put together were all iterations of that funding distribution. And then the tab also did realize that we had a tremendous amount of bicycle pedestrian applications that came in across the region. And so they said, well, what if you shifted about $9 or $10 million from roadways and bicycle pedestrian and went as far down that list as you possibly could in the bike ped categories. A lot of those are smaller dollar amounts, just to see if we could get some more funding throughout the region to different applicants. So that's the fourth one. So a few notes to pass on to you, and I know Peter Dugan has done a great job over the last several months of with great enthusiasm telling you exactly what's happening at the tab level. But one request came from the city of St. Paul, and that's under the unique project category. So they requested $6.67 million for both vehicle charging stations and in a partnership with Our Card, the purchase of electric vehicles. And so that, I think, had a roughly $4 million XL private sector donation that was part of that project. So that's been a topic of conversation at the tab level, and they hope to make a decision here in January on that City of St. Paul Our Car request. Secondly, the topic of regional balance, particularly Washington County, and most of the funding scenarios we've put together has fewer projects than perhaps they'd like. So we've heard from them and the topic of geographic balance in general. And so we're kind of working through some of the data and making sure people understand that issue. And then lastly, we did at the Technical Advisory Committee, TAC, they did recommend a fifth funding scenario. So we are working with Chair Hovland to see if TAB would like to consider that fifth funding scenario, which did give a little bit more money for the roadway projects to go further down that list. So the schedule, starting here this month, the TAC Funding and Programming Committee will make recommendations or provide input up, with TAB making the final decision in January. We hope to come back to this group at the end of January, January 28th, to give you an update on all the great projects. And again, we're looking at probably 50 or so projects throughout the region that are going to receive some level of funding. So it's quite a big day for folks when they do receive that news on January 16th. And then as far as approvals at the council level, there's 2 times where you'll have a chance to see these projects as they come into the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. Both the council sees it both in June and then the final TIP more in the September timeframe. So with that, we do want to see if you have any questions, and we can provide any input back to the TAB members too if we hear at this group.
Thank you. So there's, typically we've gone with the base scenario at TAB, and there's, as I think I talked about before, under the base scenario, Washington County would not get any roadway projects funded. However, they submitted 2. And so there has been, I would say, an effort from some to get some momentum behind the expansion heavy scenario. And it would be great if, I don't know if people have had a chance to, as members have had a chance to digest this yet, but if you don't tonight, if you could give me some reactions. I think regional balance is an important criteria, but I also feel like our TPP talks about preservation and not expansion of the roadway system, and so I've got some reservations on that. I also feel like the Our Car project is an all-electric fleet, and it's designed to help with car light and car shedding, and so it's an innovative project, and I feel like, again, we've got 12 years to make a course correction on climate change and change our habits, and this is a project. Again, there's scarce funding, and they're all good projects, but I feel like it's only 4% that you're spending on the future of transportation, basically, that is getting people to shed their cars. So I'm just giving you where I'm at, but I would really value council member feedback on this, because we're going to have an important meeting in December 19th at TAB, and then they'll make the final decisions in January. But I do feel like that December 19th meeting will be critical as well. So you don't need to tell me tonight, but do tell me. Councilmember Elkins.
Yeah, I just, what our data has shown us is that, and we've seen this over the decades really, that in any particular year, you never achieve perfect geographic balance, because there's just lumpiness in the demand for projects. But over time, geographic balance has been achieved almost to an uncanny degree. And I would urge the tab not to put too much weight on geographic balance in any one solicitation cycle.
Are there other comments or questions? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with that. We have a lot of conversations in my district about regional balance and how those numbers have played out. One thing that I think has been very helpful in some of those discussions is the data that was pulled together and that was presented on regional balance over the years. Might be a good idea to send it out freshly to the committee again, so we have that in our minds when we're talking about this.
Sure. I think that's reasonable. One compelling argument that I had heard was, in order to help achieve the regional balance, but also balance the fact that this Our Car project is more urban focused, it really is Minneapolis and St. Paul focused, that was a reasonable balance. And I think that is a compelling argument. But I like that suggestion. Are there any other comments or questions at this time? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The Orange Line update. More good news.
Well, Madam Chair, Charles Carlson, Director of BRT Projects, just by a quick moment of introduction to emphasize how excited we are about the funding news on the Orange Line project and to recognize Christina for really sticking with this project for about 6 years. The focus of her effort, obviously, in managing the project, but especially within Christina's individual work program, has been the pursuit of the federal funding application. And while it's been a big team effort to get us to this point, I wanted to underscore her accomplishment in the FTA announcement, and I'll let her share that news, as well as actually material construction progress, that it's great to compare our visualizations to now the actual work underway. And with that, Christina Morrison.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll get right into it then. The big news here, the Orange Line, on November 28th, the FTA announced that the final funding piece for this project would be awarded a single-year grant for $74 million. And this will pay for just under half of the total capital cost of the Orange Line, which is estimated at $150 million. So as you know, the Orange Line began construction earlier this year under a federal letter of no prejudice. And that was using local funds. With the funding picture complete, that means that we can kick off the next phase of construction in the corridor. So in our overall schedule, we are just completing the final design of the Knox Avenue Transitway. This has been a pretty complex design process, working with MnDOT Bridge Office to design and accommodate a future interchange that is currently starting design. And as I mentioned, we're going to be kicking off the next phase of construction that will be led by Metro Transit down at Knox Avenue this spring, with a plan to open the Orange Line in late 2021. So this is just a visual showing what that Knox Avenue Transitway will look like. It will connect Richfield and Bloomington under 494 as a transit-only roadway. It also will have a bike ped accommodation on one side of it. In addition to improving speed and reliability of BRT in this area, it also allows us to have kind of that prime walk-up access both on the Richfield side to the Best Buy headquarters, but also on the Bloomington side to Southtown Shopping Center and the emerging Penn American District. So on the construction side, you have all probably seen the construction happening out at 35W and 94. That's the road and bridge project that MnDOT is leading. And there are 5 phases of that MnDOT construction running through 2021. We are currently in phase 3 that kicked off in the end of October, and it's significant because the Highway 65 area has been reconnected into downtown, which restores all of our transit service to 35W. And we have seen a vast improvement in both speed and reliability as those buses come back to 35W with some new transit advantages. So this is an older rendering showing the 12th Street ramp. This is, again, a transit-only access to and from downtown that's going to provide that seamless access for about 24 bus routes, including the Orange Line. And here's what it looks like via drone in October. So MnDOT captured these images for us. This is how it's shaping up in the field. This fall, the 12th Street deck, bridge deck was poured on that new transit ramp, and the 11th Street, as I mentioned, was reconnected into downtown. So here's a rendering of the Lake Street station, looking kind of northeast at 35W. And here's some of the recent progress out at Lake Street. You can see the width of the new plaza taking shape both on the north and south side of Lake Street based on where those abutments are poured, those walls on each side. And those piers have been poured since this photo was taken. They are actually going to place the deck on this new bridge, southbound 35W, as soon as next week, pending weather. So looking ahead, construction is a bit quieter in the winter months, but we're continuing to work closely with our interagency partners on communication, as well as with the contractor getting ready for what's going to be happening in the spring. We'll be completing that bridge design, as I mentioned, and having those plans signed by MnDOT, be awarding the Knox Avenue Bridge and roadway package this spring, executing agreements related to construction, and of course, our funding agreement with FTA. And then really entering a new phase of public engagement. So we are planning several Orange Line celebrations this spring. And we'll also be kind of reintroducing people to the Orange Line now on that full funding path with a more secure schedule. So all good news all around. And I'm happy to take questions.
Are there questions from or comments from committee members? Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Christine, I like the phrase green crescent that was on one of your slides. Can you describe what the green crescent is?
Sure. Madam Chair, Commissioner, Councilmember Commerce. The green crescent is, you can see, runs basically between Lake Street and the Midtown Greenway along Stevens Avenue. This will be a new trail connection down to the Greenway, providing people with direct access from the station to the Midtown Greenway. So it's a new amenity for bicyclists and pedestrians. There will also be a new exit, southbound exit from 35W to Lake Street adjacent to that. So also new access for people coming to Lake Street by their modes.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Dorfman.
And there's also been a focus on bringing public art to that connection.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for all your work and congratulations. It's really exciting. Last but not least, fair policy and procedure recommended changes. Nick Yule is here to present.
Good evening once again, Madam Chair, council members. Nick Yule, Senior Manager of Revenue Operations at Metro Transit. And I'm here today to update the committee on the fair policy changes we've been discussing for quite some time now. And these conversations are stemming from last year's fare adjustment process. And so my goal today is to show you the latest fare revenue data we have for 2018, and I'll show that to you on the next slide, as well as show you what the 2019 numbers are forecasted to look like. I'll also review staff recommendations for finalizing changes to current fare procedure and policy regarding some of the topics that we've discussed previously around providing timely updates to the council on revenue system performance, as well as updating fare policy to reflect the revised recovery targets that we've spoke of. So, and hopefully this will be one of my shortest presentations to leave some time at the end for some discussion. But first, I wanted to update you on what the most recent projected fare recoveries are by mode, including where we're at in 2018, as well as what the budgeted numbers look like for 2019. You can see in this chart that both the recovery by mode as well as how the system would roll up. And again, these 2018 numbers, I think, are probably through October. So we've adjusted them based off the actual data so far. And of course, the 2019 numbers are part of our budgeted process. As you can see here, bus continues to be lower compared to what historically has been our recovery objective. I know I mentioned this a number of times during our policy discussion last year or our update discussion, but historically we've aimed for about 28.5% Metro Transit fare box recovery as one of the measures that we've sort of aimed for in terms of trying to set a recovery goal. And while this did go up, we did see about a 2% increase as a result of the fare increase last year in recovery. It still continues to be lower than where we've been historically when compared to that 28.5%. There's a couple reasons that feed this. One is that bus ridership has been down, as we all know, for a number of years, and the lower ridership has contributed to this, as well as we went 9 years between fare changes or fare increases as well. And that's a long time to go between fare increases, but that's one of the things that contributed or continues to contribute to that lower number as well. So both commuter rail and light rail, they continue to perform well. You're aware that we've had really a couple good years on the rail side, and so you can see that reflected in those numbers on the chart. And but it is worth noting that the bus system, the Metro Transit bus system still accounts for about 7 out of 10 riders. So the lower recovery rate on the bus system does kind of hold back the rest of the fleet, or the rest of the system, I should say, in terms of those recovery numbers. We're at about 24.5% projected for an overall recovery rate for 2018 when you just include those fixed route transit. This doesn't include Metro Mobility. And then we're projected to go about 1% lower next year, looking at about a 23.4% projected overall fare recovery. The good news is when bus ridership comes back, as much as that has sort of impacted the numbers on a lower side, when we do see that ridership come back, we'll see the opposite of that, hopefully, that will continue to bring up the rest of those numbers as well. So before I move on, I just wanted to hang here just in case there was any questions on this chart before I go to the next slides.
Yes, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lukowski.
I don't have a question, but I don't know, I kind of find it interesting that you're talking about the regular route service pulling down the fare box recovery when the commuter rail is really the one that's below it, even though you don't have that many rides from that. So just want to recognize that that's the number there, that's being subsidized at a higher rate than the other services that we have.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, that's correct, but it is a much lower percentage of the overall rides, so its impact is much lower than bus. So there are a couple of recommendations that we will make, or that I'm prepared to make today, based off not only staff feedback, but council feedback over the last few months and really the last year in regards to some of those policies and procedures that we have. So consistent with those discussions, we're recommending changes, first of all, to bring procedures and fare policy in line with some of the goals that have been discussed with the council related to fare policy. The hope is to review and discuss these today to get feedback from the council, and which would hopefully allow us to be in position to finalize these changes through a business item in early 2019. Staff are recommending that the council procedures be changed to reflect 2 new important pieces, and I just want to call out that we're recommending both procedure changes as well as policy changes. So I'm going to talk about the procedure changes here as well as the policy change on the next slide. And it's important to note the difference, because policy changes require Transportation Committee and I believe Management Committee input, where procedures are more driven by staff. So first procedure change is that Metro Transit will report to the council at least annually on fare revenue system performance, specifically providing annual updates on current and expected future fare recovery by mode, and do that as part of the annual operating budget that we come to the council for every year. This would be for all modes of transit, including Metro Mobility. And second, that Metro Transit staff will set annual recovery goals by mode for fixed routes of transit, including Metro Transit bus, commuter rail, and North Star. And so, maybe just to elaborate a little bit, every year we plan on, as part of the budget presentation, we'll show you where we are at for fare recovery for that year, with the information that we have, as well as part of the future budget, kind of project out like we've done here, what our recovery could be under those circumstances for all of those 3 modes, as well as combining it for the year, just to give an indication of how we're trending. And so because Metro Mobility is mandated by state and federal law and is really demand-based, We're not recommending we set annual goals for this service, but performance data would be included as part of that annual update. And so just to kind of reiterate what I noted earlier, we're recommending these changes be captured in a procedure change. And as I mentioned, procedures, we're certainly looking for council feedback on that or transportation committee feedback, but that wouldn't be something that we would necessarily include in a business item for approval as part of the approval process there. So we're also recommending changes to Council Policy 3-2-6, which is titled Transit Fare Policy Changes. And these would need to be improved by both the Transportation Committee and the Management Committee, as well as the full council, I believe, since this is a policy change as opposed to a procedure change. This policy currently states, under the policy purpose, that the regional bus system historically seeks to recover approximately 30% of its operating costs via fare box revenue. So this is actually, that sentence is actually part of the policy. This policy was updated in 2009, and as we've mentioned previously, it doesn't include any references to our rail system, which accounts for about 3 out of 10 rides in our system now. So staff are recommending this language be changed to reference a goal of collecting, and we're going to introduce a range here, and I certainly want some feedback from the committee on this idea, but a goal of collecting between 23 and 30% from all regional fixed route transit modes, including fixed route bus, light rail, and commuter rail throughout the region. So our recommendation here is we consider a range versus a fixed number, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that I know it's important to the council or the committee through previous conversations that we send a line in the sand that says when we reach this line, it's really time to start some fair adjustment conversations in earnest. And this does that at the 23%. And so if it's not initiated sooner, that could certainly be a point where we have that conversation. But two, a range also sets a ceiling. So if there is a reason for a ceiling, and I know we talked about that as part of this process as well, that we want to be careful about how much we raise fares and that we don't go too high, a range could allow some discussion around, keeping some, not making those fare increases too drastic. But three, it really provides the council some flexibility on both when and how to raise fares anywhere within that range. So we wouldn't necessarily be limited to raising fares, only when we got to 23%. There would be flexibility, I think, within that range to have a conversation. But it also allows for considering internal and external factors. We've talked before about what's the impact of declining ridership, and what's the right time to have a fare increase there, or what is what's the situation of the economy, and does that necessarily drive us towards or away from a fare increase? So I think a range provides some flexibility there to really have a conversation around when is the right time and what that could look like and what the impacts of that would be. So I know that's new, and that's, for the most part, what I wanted to present to you today. And so I'm really looking forward to some feedback from the committee on that idea and how we can start to wrap this up with something that you're comfortable with moving forward on. So.
Councilmember Dorfman.
Can I just ask a question for that? When you're talking about that range, so if you have a range that's 23 to 30% fare box recovery, are you saying that if we dropped below 23%, that would suggest triggering a fare increase?
Madam Chair, Council Member, it's really up to the council. I mean, the council has that flexibility and opportunity to really decide that at any point in time. But that, where we had set previously 28.5% Metro Transit bus fare box, was kind of that line in the sand where these conversations would really start to build around a fare increase. That 23% would be sort of the minimum, in the sense of there could certainly be opportunity before that, say at 24 or 25%, to have that conversation, depending on what else was happening. But really, when it was projected to go below that 23%, that could be the kickoff for, the absolute latest moment to have a fare increase conversation.
Well, and then let me follow up with that, because we know that every time there's a fare increase, it results in a reduction in people riding transit. So I'm not sure why. So I'm not sure I understand the logic there in terms of a solution.
So I just want to talk about my concerns about this a little bit for the committee. I am really pleased with the procedure changes. We went almost 9 years without having a fare increase, and I certainly, I'm sure you were presenting it, but I didn't know the fare box recovery for the bus was dropping so much. And so building it into the annual budget process is transparency for both council members and the public to have this discussion, and the legislature. I mean, the legislature is a big, they are funding this, helping to subsidize our service. And so they are partners. We don't control all the levers on this, and that is really important to remember. So I'm really pleased with that work, and I thought it was a really good suggestion. I am I'm a little hesitant about changing the policy. I originally, Councilmember Munt suggested that we should change the policy. As a council, I thought it was a great idea, but that was a while ago, and it took a little bit longer to study this. We came to a committee of the whole meeting. There wasn't actually a lot of feedback from council members during that meeting, and now I feel like we're an outgoing council, and so my recommendation would be that we don't have to act on the procedures, but I think they're great suggestions, but that we consider having the council policy be updated by the future council. I mean, we can certainly have a discussion. And this is my last transportation committee, so this is really a decision for you all. And I also think having a range that is smaller, I mean, 23 to 28%, would allow us, it would be a realistic range, and then it would also allow us to continue to expand our transit assistance program, which I think is really important. It also will give us time to engage the community. I've had 3 emails and a phone call on this today. And even though we didn't have a lot of feedback from the community when we had the committee of the whole, for some reason, folks saw it on our agenda today. And so I'm considering continuing to hear. I would like us to extend our low income program, and is there any possibility of free fares, which again, the legislature is going to have to be a big part of any kind of consideration like that. And I know MTS is looking at what has happened in other areas when they have tried to do that. But I just wanted to throw that out there, and then really this is a decision for you all. Councilmember Munt.
So, Madam Chair, I would concur with letting the next council set the fare box recovery, and that's because we've recently increased fares. Probably won't do it for a while again. And I remember when somebody said, well, our fare box recovery is 28.5%, and I thought, I as a policymaker never voted on that. I didn't own it. I didn't know to watch for it. So I really feel strongly that the next council needs to own the decision. But part of my rationale with wanting to establish that is I recognize that it's harder for our riders to go a long time without a fare increase and then have a really steep fare increase versus a smaller gradual fare increase. Just economically, for somebody who's struggling paycheck to paycheck, it's a disservice for us to not raise fares and then all of a sudden raise them significantly. And the other piece was, whenever we talked about this, it was, if we fall beneath this fare box recovery rate, it doesn't mean we're going to raise fares. It means we're going to engage in a conversation with our riders, with the public, about making that decision. So I don't want to say that, if we fall beneath this number, that means we automatically raise fares. It just means we have the same robust kind of conversation that we've had in the past.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Elkins.
I think it's good for us to remember that the fare box recovery ratio actually held up quite a while during our tenure, and that it really wasn't a cost factors that really drove it down suddenly. It was ridership drops. So it's, if ridership rebounds, that alone is going to improve the fare box recovery. That, could well happen with some of the things like 35W, getting back to normal, for example, and increases in the workforce in downtown Minneapolis. a couple of other things. One would be that just I think bear in mind that the state law also requires us to look at subsidy per ride in addition to the fare box recovery ratio, and that I think it's still useful to break out the regular the local service and the express service as well.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Elkins, I didn't mention that, but the thinking is when we give the annual report related to fare recovery, that would be one component of that as well, where we could break it out and show both the, the historical or that year's subsidy per ride, as well as try and project forward to the best of our ability as part of that annual update.
Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with everything that's been said so far. One thing I would suggest is that I think for the reasons, Nick, that you suggested Metro Mobility is currently omitted, I see those maybe as the strongest reasons why we should be including Metro Mobility in some consideration of fare box recovery, in the sense that if we do not shine kind of the full bright light into that situation, which is going probably to get more challenging and not less so, it makes it harder for us to engage our partners, particularly the legislature. And I think there's an analog in the education world in Minnesota, which is that the school districts are very good at communicating the amount of the general education dollars that they're allotted by the state that they need to use for other mandated purposes. And those mandated purposes are legitimate uses, but they're unfunded. And I think that's an opportunity for us to use the same kind of transparent communication with our partners and with all the stakeholders who have something to gain or lose with the Metro Mobility service. So I would suggest we include it.
Can I clarify? Do you, are you referring to the procedures so that MTS would set a goal for the fare box recovery, or are you talking about for the policy having a combined range for fare box recovery?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually was focused more on just including it in the sense of disclosure, not as much about what are the bookends of the target, but just making sure that that is included with communication about what the fare box recovery is among the other modes.
Thank you. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do like the idea of including some discussion about Metro Mobility and the fare box recovery numbers. I would recommend in that annual report that it be shown both like this and then with that number pulled so you can see the difference, because it does skew the numbers a great deal. And I think it shows really, it's a good way to depict the impact it really has on the budget.
Madam Chair, council members, as part of the procedure, I may not have been clear, but we do recommend that as part of that annual process anyway, when we bring forward both the current year as well as the next budget year fare recovery numbers for fixed route, that we also include that for Metro Mobility. So we'll certainly be talking about that. We had not recommended including that as part of whatever that that range is, or whatever we land on as a fare recovery goal, only because of the mandated service there. So if I hear you correctly, I think we were planning on that we're in line with what you were suggesting.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but also just for your own reference, I think historically our recovery is about 11 to 13% for Metro Mobility, but our other thinking is we would never impose a fare increase for Metro Mobility based on a recovery, because it's driven by the local fare. But clearly we want to show that information about what this service is, how much it costs, how it relates to other services, and we bring that forward.
Councilmember Mott.
So, Madam Chair, Nick, in the recommendations, I'm unclear as to whether we're blending the modes, light rail, commuter rail, and transit and buses, or are we looking at each one individually as it relates to the recovery?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Mott, two pieces to that. First, we're recommending that as part of the annual update process that we identify those modes separately, much like this chart does. So this chart could be as an example of something that you may see as part of that annual process. So we would be sharing those and then talking about, the goals or what we project those to be in the year ahead as part of the budget process. But if you look at the number in yellow there, that 24.5% or the 23.4%, we're recommending that for the policy change, if we wanted to move to, a different goal than the 28.5% or what's identified as a 30% regional goal, that we would use that collective goal, recognizing that, the fare recovery throughout the whole system is what's important. And so shifting from a Metro Transit fare box goal to an overall fixed route recovery goal as, that indicator of when we need to start those fare increase or fare adjustment conversations in earnest. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one last thought for me is that I'm fond of comparing our fare box recovery ratio to the gas pump recovery ratio for cars, and which is very similar actually. But if we're going to take this to legislature, I'll just say that the pushback I always get from that from the other side of the aisle is that on the what's financed by from the gas pump side, it's all capital, and they're fond of reminding me that it's not customary for transit operators to include capital in their operating expenses, but. It would be useful to know, what it would be if we did include depreciation of facilities and rolling stock in the number as well.
That's a good point. Anything else? So I think consensus for the procedures, but I'll wait for the next council for the policy. Is that what I'm okay? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And good work on this. We keep referencing the legislature. We're sort of bringing a message to the legislature.
Yeah. That's right.
Unless there's anything further.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Dorfman.
So I think during the Dayton administration, this committee has been ably led by 3 chairs, I believe, by Adam and Lona, and now by you. And since this is your last meeting, you've been amazing and you've been great, and we've had some major milestones that ended your tenure chairing, and so thank you for your leadership.
I'm going to try not to cry.
You mentioned that this is your last meeting. Are we having is this committee meeting again this year? This is it for the year. We're done.
Happy holidays.
This might
that mean
be,
that it's
unless we have one in
Councilmember
really early
Elkins?
January. This is probably going to be my
This
last.
is your last
So it's
meeting as
also
well.
Councilmember Elkins' last.
So clap for a seat.
There was also a transportation committee.
And are you going to be on the transportation committee?
Almost certainly.
Yeah, good. I'll be working on those.
Let's clap for that, too.
Very good. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you.